All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for taking an hour out of your busy days today. Hope all is well or as well as can be in these uncertain and challenging times. Um, you'll have to bear with my sniffles. I'm in Salt Lake City, and we have for three going on 4 days in a row the worst air quality in the U.S. and it is catching up with me. So I will do my best to not sniffle and inflict too much of that on y'all, but it will it will catch up to me. So excited to share with everybody about our book. So published last October, The Pathways of Social Impact, Higher Education for the Public Good. Um, and for folks who may be joining and not familiar with Campus Compact's work, Campus Compact envisions a world in which all of higher education commits to advancing equitable, accessible, and just democracy, where colleges and universities serve as responsive and transformative agents of change, with students, faculty, staff, and administrators joining as true partners with communities and contributing to our collective flourishing. And the mission of Campus Compacts is to support, engage, and challenge higher education to realize its public purpose. So if anybody's joining a Campus Compact webinar for the first time, welcome. That's a tiny bit about the work, and excited to dig in and talk about our book. We've got a quick poll that we're going to launch now to get people's, just to gauge your familiarity with the Pathways framework that we're going to talk about, and also with the book itself. All right, perfect. Thank you to those who had a chance to fill out the poll, and I'll give the results so folks can see where your fellow attendees are at. So several learning about it for the first time today, or have heard of the Pathways, and then a few who have used it, four who've used it in a class or a program, and a couple who are using it extensively. And then we've got a pretty almost even split about familiarity with the book. So helpful for us as we craft our presentation for you today. So um, that. So the Pathways of Public Service have been around for quite some time. I'm not going to get into the history of the kind of origin story. You can go back actually if you're interested in that and watch the October webinar. We get into a little bit further around that. One thing you might notice, either throughout this presentation or as you engage more with the Pathways framework, it could go by many different names. So the page that I'm sharing right now is sort of the original Pathways of Public Service and Civic Engagement. You'll notice that the book actually goes by Pathways of Social Impact. Other campuses call it the Pathways of Community Engagement. And so the idea was to make this a sort of form-fitting to your specific case. Part of the reason why the book is named the Pathways of Social Impact is to sort of broaden how we're thinking about it, and also because my home institution, the Center for Social Impact, played a big role in helping the book come to existence. So this is the original Pathways framework. We don't, we encourage people to change the label as much as fits for your campus. I think there was one campus a few years ago that actually called it the avenues of civic engagement, because the Pathways nomenclature was used quite extensively at a community college, and they didn't want that to overlap. So the Pathways are designed to be a thinking heuristic for students to explore what they care about when it comes to civic engagement or to social impact. So the 6 pathways are community engaged learning and research, direct service, policy and governance, community organizing and activism, philanthropy, and social entrepreneurship. There have been over the years many conversations about the possibility of adding or changing or adjusting, and we've never come to anything that we felt really confident about making a big adjustment to. So they're not meant to be discrete categories that are discussed in isolation, but rather ways of thinking and exploring about how social change happens. So The book is divided into three sections. Today, we're going to get a deep dive into the practitioner profiles. We have three of the practitioner profile authors with us today. They're going to share their experiences in crafting that and a little more about some fun things that they learned. There's a section of current uses, which features case studies from 8 campuses around the U.S. A good range of private, public, residential, and designed to, to give readers more of an interest in or more of an understanding in the different ways that the Pathways framework has been used. And then the last section is a series of reflections for elevating concepts for consideration as we continue to build the work and build the field. So the practitioner profiles were really designed to be an accessible resource that's digestible for students, staff, faculty, community partner organizations. They're really meant to give a snapshot and a deeper dive. The current uses might be, mostly interesting to an academic audience, but just wanted to share that. So this is something that I'm super proud of and always like to highlight. This is all the contributors of the book. And you'll maybe see some familiar names there. You can see how the authors separate in each of the sections there. So one of the challenges with creating the practitioner profiles was thinking about how to highlight these distinctions between those pathways without severing connections. And what we mean by that is there's necessarily some overlap, some interconnectedness, some relationships between those pathways. But in order for us to start and really dig into this research project, we needed to kind of put them in their own lanes so that folks could do a deeper dive into the literature and really try to think intentionally about each of these pathways in isolation rather than in their interconnectedness. So one of the things that we acknowledge with the practitioner profiles is that they're meant to be emergent and generative. We don't think that this is the last version, but this is the starting place of where we continue to build and grow resources around this framework as people continue to use it. And we also took some very intentional efforts in avoiding political partisan leaning. And that's not because we don't have our own politics or we want to discourage students from having their own politics, but we didn't want to create something that might immediately make a student not feel like they can connect with the framework, right? And so you'll see in examples that we use that we quite frankly took a painstaking amount of time to be able to think about examples in ways that wouldn't or minimize the amount of sort of political inferences that students would make from the get-go. Of course, we want students to grow into their own politics as they use this framework and to be able to to perhaps even challenge their own politics. But we wanted to be really intentional as we set out to avoid having our own politics being the kind of guiding feature of the work here. So the practitioner profiles came to be over the course of a couple years. It started with an extensive literature review. And once we felt pretty good about drafts with literature reviews, we completed what we called practitioner checks. So we wanted to avoid the term expert because we recognize that a student who has a deep interest in community organizing might certainly have something to offer to this conversation, but not consider themselves an expert in the field. So we did individual checks, we did focus groups, and we used those to see how the literature reviews that we had currently developed aligned with people's experience who were working in these various fields and various pathways. Throughout this process, we started with knowledge, skills, and attributes. And throughout the process, we actually realized that there was an important distinction to be made between technical and relational skills. That we saw this sort of naturally happening among the profiles as a way to acknowledge that something like a technical skill like navigating sorry, I just got a brain freeze, right? So technical skill, typewriting, that's a technical skill, right? Relational skill, being able to being able to host a meeting to organize a group of people. And so that's a really important distinction that came to be. Um, and then we also did a series of job titles as a way just to start a thinking. We really wanted to emphasize that this was not an exclusive, these are the only jobs that you could find in X, Y, or Z field, but just as a list to help students start to think about what those jobs might look like and how they might start to think about them. In one of the earlier versions, we actually had a section about academic disciplines, and we decided along the way that we did not want to add the academic disciplines section out of fear that a student might think, I can't be a community organizer and a marine biologist at the same time, because of course a student could be a community organizer and a marine biologist. And so we worried that by creating a list of um, academic disciplines that might start to get exclusionary. So we're going to shift to talking a little bit more about three of our practitioner profiles. And I'm just going to encourage folks as we're talking through these profiles to share any association that you might have or keyword, and then encourage you, if you have questions that come up now, feel free to ask them, to put them in the chat, to raise your hand. We'll also have some time at the end for discussion. So if you've got a question that comes up with one of our next presenters, feel free, raise your hand, put it in the chat, or save it till the end, whatever works best for you. Okay, and I am going to pass it now to Naruchi to talk about the philanthropy practitioner profile.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. And hey, everyone, it's so nice to see some familiar faces and names on this webinar, and really honored to be here and share a little bit about the philanthropy pathway. So yeah, just out of curiosity, when you think about the word philanthropy or this particular pathway, similar to what Sean asked, what are some words or phrases that really come to mind in terms of a descriptor, or maybe even some kind of challenges that you find with this pathway? If you can drop some things in the chat, that'll help tee me up for some of what I'm hoping to share today. Amazing. Look at that. Okay, so I'm seeing giving. Absolutely. I'm seeing money. I'm seeing donor, both in terms of those who are donating money, but then also I see from Mindy. Hey, Mindy, good to see you again. Donor relations. Chris, I appreciate this relationship building, grants. Oh, I like this partner investment. Okay. I like this expansion here for Mike about donating money, but also goods, maybe even services. Awesome. Yeah, and Stephen, I see your point here about inaccessible unless you have a lot of money. Absolutely. So, and top-down influence for sure. Thank you, Kathy. This is really helpful to just know where folks are at, especially the piece about inaccessibility. So something that, was challenging for me when I was thinking about this pathway was just reflecting on kind of my own experience coming into this world and work. So for context, I currently work as the Director of Policy and Research at an organization called the Center for Economic Democracy. And my background really has been at the nexus of racial and economic justice movements. So I've worked kind of tangentially to and as an advisor to philanthropy for the past 8 to 10 years, and have learned a lot and challenged some of my own assumptions about what this pathway really is and what it could mean for students. So prior to kind of doing these practitioner profiles, Sean had led us through this process of designing literature reviews to really see, what does the higher ed literature have to say about each of these pathways? And maybe they're, called different things. But for sure, a lot of the literature around philanthropy did acknowledge, it is quite inaccessible for many students, particularly first gen students, students of color, and other students from limited income backgrounds. However, there are lots of opportunities within a university setting to get involved in different types of giving or philanthropy, right? Anything from some of the direct service involvements that our students do. There was a really comprehensive literature on philanthropy and giving as really critical to Greek life and culture, as well as some other kind of associations on campus. But the biggest assumption that I really wanted to challenge, both in this profile, but also kind of generally along the course of my career, is that you have to be rich to be involved in philanthropy. So, one of the practitioners I had the honor of speaking to, Heather, she used to work at Stanford's philanthropy center or institute. It's called PAX, which don't ask me what the acronym means, but you can Google it. But I really love this quote. So she shared, for a lot of people, my 20-year-old self included, philanthropy is not an immediately apparent layer of reality. I imagine philanthropists to be rather like the Wizard of Oz. I found this quote kind of fun considering the wicked craze that we're in the middle of. Pushing and pulling levers behind the green curtain, conjuring up programs that expand the human capacity for wonder, connection, exploration, and social justice. So, what I really did in terms of the process of bringing together this profile was to kind of marry the literature in higher education about the philanthropy pathway, about giving, and how it relates to some of these other pathways you'll hear about today. And then also kind of the literature around philanthropy as a field and as an industry that really has popped up over the past 30 to 40 years. Sean, if we can go to the next slide. Right. So that being said, this is just a kind of smattering of what the field of philanthropy really looks like, right? So we've seen, from big family names like Carnegie and Rockefeller, when they really thought about giving away portions of their wealth, and again, not always altruistically, and we can chat about that in a bit. But since then, there's been this real kind of professionalization of the field of philanthropy, where students in particular, depending on their array of skill sets, academic disciplines, to Sean's point, and interests, they can really engage within this pathway as a part of their career in one of these different ways. So just to bring to light, when we think about philanthropy, we traditionally think about the foundation, right? So a nonprofit entity that is, federally mandated to redistribute 5% of its assets along the course of a fiscal year. But also there are lots of other ways to think about it. So we've got corporations that might have a philanthropic arm or a grant making arm. Government agencies, right, from the federal government to state and local governments, lots of grant making opportunities and even investments available there. You've got some more relational type entities from donor networks and giving circles that are often organized by affinity or identity. You've got family offices, right? And we've seen these really come up and be especially important as we live through what is called the Great Wealth Transfer. So folks have found that within the next 20 to 25 years, we're expecting about $125 trillion of wealth being transferred from the baby boomer generation to their heirs. And so, of course, there's going to be a really strong need for current students to be able to accompany wealth holders and really thinking about, how do they want to redistribute their wealth and how can they do that in a way that aligns with their values. And then lastly, want to just point out integrated capital funds that we'll talk about in just a little bit, but that really looks at, the full array of capital that is available in different types of financial instruments that can really build community wealth and kind of putting them together into one vehicle or entity so that more and better dollars are going into communities. And that actually brings me to my last slide, which is sort of, to conclude this time, but also to conclude the work that I did with the profiles and especially the literature review. I was really moved by, a lot of the work that we do at the Center for Economic Democracy is really thinking about something called movement finance and regenerative finance. So the idea here, right, is that philanthropic dollars are just one type of capital that can be, again, redistributed and invested into communities. But if we really want to move towards a more democratic style of governing our economic system, we can really think about how are we collectivizing ownership and democratizing governance of these particular dollars. So things like integrated capital funds, community investment funds, other community investment vehicles have really been popping up to be sort of these tangents to the world and work of philanthropy, particularly during this time where we're seeing federal dollars kind of recede from our communities. And so we're seeing private and other forms of capital really pop up. And so this quote here, "What if money could heal?" Is sort of the kind of, landmark quotes from Edgar Villanueva, who authored the book Decolonizing Wealth. So he, as an indigenous man, really brings into his work in philanthropy some of these principles of, looking at money as something that isn't just transactional, but is much more relational. And so to kind of just conclude my time here today, I think something that felt really compelling to me and exciting about this profile and something I hope you walk away with is, how can we really train our students to be able to realize kind of this promise of regenerative finance and really think about the role that money plays in kind of the broader, social change ecosystem. So thank you so much, and thank you for Sean for this opportunity. And yeah, open to answering any questions in the chat or later in the webinar.
Great. I'm happy to go next. I apologize for the brief um, silence there as I figured out how to unmute myself. My name is Mike Moon. I am the author of the Direct Service Practitioner Profile, and currently am not associated with an institution of higher education. I work with the State Service Commission of Utah, and so similar to Sean, I'm experiencing the poor air quality that we have here in the state, but excited to be with you all, and similar to Nairuti, fun to see some familiar faces and names. So as I worked through my process to write the direct service profile, there are several things that I needed to work through. The first was this idea of that Sean mentioned of blended pathways. And as I started to get into the research and do my literature review, terms such as volunteerism and service and even service learning are used interchangeably for lots of different definitions across the literature. So in order to best understand direct service, I had to really dig into sub-literature reviews and even content of particular references in text to understand that. I think perhaps that direct service may be one of the pathways that is an umbrella pathway and can be associated with all of the others. Direct service can be done in policy and entrepreneurship work and service learning and community engaged learning and so many other things, community engaged research that to Sean's point, a really strict definition that if any reference to any of those other things is a tie to an academic course or a grassroots effort, then it became another pathway, not direct service. I think something else that I had to grapple with when writing this is a paradigm shift, as mentioned here, that direct service or this pathway can be seen as a band-aid or not as needed or as of substance as the other pathways because it's temporary aid. And as I dove into the research and started to do my own focus groups and survey and gather my own data, I found it really interesting to know that it is a catalyst to some of the other pathways and to lifelong community engagement, that oftentimes it is the entry, the catalyst, the gateway drug of community engagement is direct service. Sean, you can go to the next slide. Great. So as already mentioning this, I think it's also important to delineate, as I mentioned, anytime that another reference to a pathway was mentioned in literature, then I would dismiss it because then it became the other pathway. So for example, if co-curricular work was happening while doing direct service, it became community engaged learning and research and part of that pathway. And this was tricky because, as I mentioned, lots of the research lumps all of these initiatives and this work together in terms that are used broadly across the literature. So that's how I in particular came to the definition of what is direct service and how to distinguish it. Is if it had a reference to one of the other pathways, then it was not in reference to direct service. It became that pathway. You can go on to the next slide, whoever's controlling the slides. Something else that became really evident in researching the direct service pathway is that it can also be seen as the fluff, right? Or unneeded or unnecessary or not as important as. And again, in diving into the research, it became really evident that it is not fluff. It is stuff. That direct service, although sometimes done according to the definition that I came to, co-curricularly or extracurricularly, does have its own merit, and it does address immediate needs in the community. It has its own merit for the community in terms of the work that's being done, and the immediate needs do exist, and those immediate needs need to be addressed as more system-wide solutions are being developed and vetted and researched and et cetera, and put into policy and things like that. But direct needs exist currently and need to be met. So it has its own merit with regard to the work in the community and has its own merit with regard to the individual completing or doing the service. That skills and stuff, so to speak, happens as a result of a direct service as well. And again, mentioning that often, probably the most broad reference that I saw to the direct service pathway in literature and that I heard in focus groups and on surveys and saw in surveys is that it is an entry point. It is the way that those doing the work arrive at the work. And perhaps it's similar for your own pathways here on this call. For me, it's that way. I participated in volunteer work and slowly, as a result of participating more and more often in volunteer work, discovered other pathways and deeper ways in which to engage in my community and other ways in which to work and effectuate change and serve the community. But it started with direct service, without a tie to academics, without a tie to any of the other pathways. And so those were some assumptions of mine as a practitioner that changed. Another lens through which I looked at this work is my background for the first 15 years of my career was in higher education. And now working with the State Service Commission and seeing volunteerism broadly for the public, not only those in an institution of higher education and seeking higher education, has been an interesting lens to see this work through, and its essential role in the overall picture of volunteerism, addressing needs and meeting the needs of a society and the public within the state. That's what I have. Similar to philanthropy, happy to answer any questions either through the chat or at the end of the call, but thanks for the opportunity, Sean.
Hi, everyone. Renee Lee here, known in the book and in my former academic life as Renee Sedlacek. And so nice to see also, as others have said, very familiar faces on this webinar today. Little bit of background about me. I was a service learning baby, if you will. I got my start at Central College as an undergrad. And tasted the service learning water, loved it, ended up becoming an AmeriCorps Vista at Central, and then had my first professional position out of school at Wartburg College as their service learning coordinator at the time. To then the most recent, before where I'm at now, spent 10 years at Drake University and was formerly the director of community engaged learning. So I've had an 18-year career that, just like others have said on this call, so intertwined to who I am as a person, personally and professionally. And then in 2023, I made a major pivot. So I'm sharing my perspective today from this unique career pivot to transitioning out of higher ed and into the world of SaaS, which stands for Software as a Service. So I now work for a company called Workiva, based out of Iowa. We are a global technology company that helps other companies with their data management, collection, and then ultimately reporting of finance, sustainability, audit, and risk information. And as part of that position, I am Senior Manager of Public Affairs. And in fact, I will be boarding a plane tomorrow on my way to Switzerland, as our company will have a delegation on ground at the World Economic Forum. And the picture you see on the screen is with our most recent former Chief Financial Officer. I help support our executives at large global stakeholder convenings like the UN Global Compact. And why that's important is because there's a thread that's super connected, and the Pathways was a key component to my evolution and my journey to even getting to where I'm at. So I bring to you today kind of this both sides perspective, right? I now understand the academic goals of social change. I did my dissertation while I was at Drake on the Pathways, and actually chapter 18 of the book, you can find kind of a summary and overview of that. And I'll bring, while today is not focused on that chapter, it certainly informed that some of the development of this practitioner profile. So that's the world I bring to you. And creating this profile allowed me to blend both that business acumen with, what is Pathways really about, I should say, is blending that business acumen with commitment to social impact. And I'll be transparent about the fact that prior to even Pathways, I was dodgy on corporate social responsibility, seeing it as fluff, kind of like what Mike said about volunteer service. And so I'm curious, others on the call, when you saw Pathways for the first time and you see corporate social responsibility, social entrepreneurship, what was your reaction? What did you think? What came to mind? Either come off mute or give us some notes in the chat box, please. Tom's shoes, Sean, okay. As an example, for those who don't know, Tom's got their start making shoes and saying for every purchase we make, we will then give a shoe to someone in need. Corporate philanthropy being a marketing initiative. Skepticism, multiple motives. B Corps, yep. An important component, business strategy. Okay. So I would, we don't have a lot of interaction here, but of those of you who chose to put opinion out there, very similar, I would say, to where I was at. And it's through my journey of yep, you can go to the next one, Sean. Oh, you know what? This didn't update. I have two other slides, Sean. I'm wondering if you can refresh your browser. Sorry, I just added them. But very similar to some of you in the chat is that I kind of came with that perspective, and what I've walked away with after spending a lot of time, if anyone's done a dissertation, you know how much time that takes, spending a lot of time really thinking about this model, and very passionate about what it does to challenge bias, challenge perspective, and open up the avenues and doors for students to get engaged and make a difference. Because at the end of the day, what it's about is impact. So as I got into it, you know, when I was in higher ed, understood corporate social responsibility as volunteering, volunteer hours, you know, kind of helps their brand look good. And then we were starting at Drake to get into social innovation through some of the Ashoka work and change making, but still didn't really click until then I was on this side of it. So if you go to the next slide, Sean. And as I was working through I have an interesting perspective too on this project because I came into this profile halfway through. So actually there had been the start of this profile and it couldn't be finished. And so I jumped in, and the perspective that was written lacked a key component that is happening in corporate life. All of us probably have heard this phrase ESG, especially here in the US. It's very politicized and you don't actually probably hear about it as much anymore. But there's a key component in corporate social responsibility that was missing from the slide that is permeating the world. UN Global Compact for the Sustainable Development Goals has more than 20,000 corporations that are members of that, committing to making more sustainable choices. And so it wasn't as, I don't know, the skepticism I had, as Rodalyn said, or they got so many motives. While some of that is there, what I've come to learn and appreciate is that there's far more people doing good work than there is the opposite. So if you go to the next slide. So I want to challenge what, you know, it kind of came in my dissertation work, but also through this, the development of this profile is challenging the community engagement professionals as well as our students, but our bias on this, right? And in talking with Tom, who was one of the original co-founders, the OG of Pathways, you know, I interviewed him for the dissertation. There was a point in time where social entrepreneurship and corporate social responsibility, it was being advocated that we don't include that pathway. And I am so glad that that decision did not stick, because I think it would have been short-sighted. In my research, a lot of folks see this as a pathway for business students, and it just kind of gets put in that box. But the reality is that there now are jobs and commitments globally for folks to make money and do well and do good. And those don't have to be mutually exclusive. And I think oftentimes we think that this is juxtaposed with direct service, or we only see the direct service component of corporate, you know, philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. But in my company, for example, we are tracking our carbon reduction, and we have a strategy in place for how we can reduce our carbon impact. That's corporate social responsibility from the lens of ESG. There are regulations across Europe that are now requiring companies to report, if they are a publicly traded company, to report out different sustainability efforts and metrics, right? There's accountability, and we're seeing that across the globe. And so there's real jobs here for folks. So if you go to the next slide, jobs that may not be top of mind, right? On the procurement team, where is the company getting their furniture, or if they're a clothing company, their materials, and are they sourcing that in a sustainable manner? What about labor rights and the folks that are on the ground making that clothing, making that equipment? Are they being treated fairly? There's an entire supply chain component to this that on the surface may not be seen. And so I think by exposing students to this pathway, we have lots of ways that we can actually strengthen our corporations that are seeking to do these things. And it's not in, I call them the invisible impact roles, right? So students with a political science background who are really interested in ethics and compliance, we need those folks. So much of this world on the corporate side is driven by regulation, and not just voluntary compliance. But it also goes all the way down to like the local level, right? Affordable housing. Here in Iowa, where I live, there's Anna Wim Housing is an example I can think of. It's a nonprofit that provides affordable housing, but then they spun up a social enterprise arm, right? To then invest the funds that are made from that into them being able to provide their services. So there's real integration, and there are ethics behind it, and companies and corporations that are doing it in the right way. And then just the biggest thing I'll leave everyone with that is, I think, the most practical for any of these, but particularly the social entrepreneurship one, is apprenticing with the problem. Daniela Pappy Thornton is the one that coined this. She's got some great things out there. It comes through the Ashoka kind of world, but students, and this is where then the other pathways come into play. Service learning or community-based research courses are so important because we need students to understand the intricacies of the problems that are trying to be solved. We need to then have those active reflexive listening and reflection skills, right? And the ability to not just take a problem from the surface, but to be able to critically think and dig in and think about the systems and the layers behind it. That's what's needed on a global scale, and it starts at the local, right? And so it's not just well, we'll use Tom's. I don't have Tom shoes, and no offense to anybody that does, and I have no idea what their business model is at this point in time, but when they started, it was buy one, give one. And what ended up happening is certain low income, primarily in Africa, communities, they would come in, gift all these shoes. And what they were undoing is, or they were not acknowledging the community, the workers, the economic system that was already in place. And so it displaced, if you have an influx of product coming in, that changes the supply and demand, which then changes the sources that people are relying on current folks for. Another example is our company is partnered with MasterCard, and there is a coalition of companies across the globe called the Priceless Planet Coalition. And it's a coalition coming together to plant 55 million trees across that's not something we could do on our own, but if we partner with others, we can. And the cool thing about MasterCard is that, they're a payment services company, and we probably all at one point in time have had a MasterCard card in our hands. Then they have these point of service sales things that allow their consumers to be able to participate as well. But the idea there is we're investing in restoring or building new rainforests, but there's a whole community and social aspect to it as well. It's not just going in and but it's building the community around that and creating the economic system that is going to then build up not just reforestation, but then the whole community that is involved. So, like everyone else said, totally happy to entertain questions and talk further, but I want to be mindful of the rest of our time and turn it back over to you, Sean.
Awesome. Thank you, Renee, Mike, and Naruti. So pointing out that we had, that was 3 of the 6 pathways that we had time to cover today, right? So we didn't think that covering all 6 in an hour would give the opportunity to really demonstrate the depth and the thoughtfulness and the complexity of each of these pathways and the possibilities for provoking students to think differently about the ways that they can make the impact in the world that they want to make. So and we also were intentional about kind of talking about the process and the nuance as opposed to looking specifically at what the knowledge, skills, attributes are within each of those pathways, and the chapters do have those as a thinking tool. We also did a cross analysis of all six and came up with a a set of, again, preliminary, but a set of knowledge, technical skills, relational skills, and attributes that are shared across each of the pathways. So examples of that for knowledge would be historical and contemporary context of the issue and larger field. Technical skills like systems thinking, communication assessment, relational skills like trust building, openness and humility as attributes, right? So these are characteristics that should span each of the pathways, which gives another layer of possibilities in terms of how to engage students with this work in meaningful and co-creative ways. So I know we've got about 10 minutes left, so I wanted to share just an example of uh, a way to leverage the entire Pathways framework as a whole. And so earlier in the webinar, when I mentioned the painstaking detail we took to try to not have a partisan political leaning in the language that we used. I think we probably spent, across months, multiple parts of multiple meetings crafting the language that you see here as a way to not try to immediately turn someone off from the Pathways framework. So, and this was created, I should mention, 7 years ago. 2019, this example was framed. And so what you see here is the issue of immigration put in the center. And then through each of the 6 pathways, we have an example. So community engaged learning and research could look like conducting research on the healthcare coverage status of immigrants. Surprisingly, that's as relevant today as it was 7 years ago, right? Community organizing and activism work with advocacy groups that address the legal rights of immigrants. We really towed the line there and said, right, like the direct service, tutor immigrant elementary school students in English, philanthropy, donate funds to an immigration reform initiative that you support, et cetera, right? Policy and governance, write letters to local legislators regarding immigration ballot initiatives, corporate social responsibility, and social entrepreneurship. Find ways to use technology to streamline the visa application process. So I wanted to give an opportunity with some of our time left. If folks see maybe an immediate fit that you could use this model, use this framework in a class that you're teaching, in a program that you're running, through a social issue that's really important to you. Does anybody want to give an issue and an example or two? You don't necessarily need to go through um, each of the 6. One that jumps out. Feel free to put it in the chat as well.
While people are thinking, Sean, I'll just jump in. And this may be kind of just repetition based on some of the presentation or the discussions we've had so far, but like I was thinking about that last example with immigration, and once again from the CSR side, these things overlap, right? And what's considered a corporate social responsibility could be direct service, right? Maybe it's tutoring with immigrants so they can read the applications or different things like that. But from the corporate side, it's considered, volunteer service. And so I think just to reiterate everything you said at the very beginning, that these aren't cut and dry silos, right? And that they overlap. And I think that's part of the beauty and the reflection of this with our students. If you were to have them put an issue that they could then map, right? Is that there's intersection, and there's not just one way to address or one way to look at it, and then intersects.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start to close us with a couple opportunities. If you're interested in engaging further, there is a pre-conference at Compact 26 if folks are planning on attending that. Today is the last day for early bird registration. I was, if for the early bird discount. So if you're planning on it, haven't registered, whether or not you attend the pre-conference, of course, it's, Compact is always a wonderful, a wonderful place to connect and share space. We will have a pre-conference meeting at that event. And there is a working group of currently about 55 colleges and universities around the United States that all get together a few times a year. Usually quarterly webinars, and we try to do retreats about every other year, every 18 months. And so you will get to, at that pre-conference, it is open to folks who are not in the working group. So you don't need to necessarily commit to the full, joining the working group. The working group is no cost for Compact members. So that's not what I meant to say there. And we have three more webinars scheduled throughout. So if you registered for this one, you probably saw the other couple that we have scheduled. So in February, we're going to do two webinars around current uses. So you'll get to see a deeper dive from four different campuses with very, very unique applications and kind of depth of use and range of use of the Pathways framework, if that's of interest to you. And then our April session will be featuring a couple of the reflections that I mentioned at the start. If folks have not gotten their copy of the book, I'm going to put a link in the chat that has a discount code. One of the things that I'm trying to encourage folks, if you have the capacity to get a copy in your library so that students can have free access to it. I'm much more interested in the work getting to folks that are going to use it than selling an X number of copies of the book. So if that's a possibility at your home institutions, the library copy can make it broadly accessible for more faculty and things like that. And I think, I just want to open it up for kind of a general questions, comments. We got a couple minutes left if folks have anything to share. Got a great quote from John. Remember a student who did direct service through Sexual Assault Crisis Center, then got drawn into statewide organizing to lobbying the state legislature for a specific policy that would offer needed protection. Yeah, two of the six. Yeah, several of the six, right? Direct service, community organizing, policy and governance, and what a and now a state representative. That's fantastic, right? And a wonderful example of the sort of overlapping and the ways that engagement with one of the pathways can bring us into more and expand our ways again of thinking about making the contributions to the world that we want to see. Thanks for that example, John. That's fantastic. Any other questions while we got a couple minutes left?
I I had a question.
Yeah, please.
I put this in the chat also, but I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the difference between community engaged learning and research compared to academic service learning.
Yeah, that's a great question and hard to sort of in 2 minutes. As we talk about the pathway of community engaged learning and research, the way that we distinguish community engaged learning from community engaged research would be, students doing a service learning project with a community partner that might be, stocking a food pantry or something like that, right? As a learning project. Engaged research being that we're trying to produce new knowledge that can make a meaningful contribution to a social issue, to a community organization, to a community. And academic service learning, some of it is just nomenclature that depends on where you are, right? I would say academic service learning could mean both of those things in context, right? And so it's one of those where there are some nuances and there are some times where I think we say, we use different words and mean the same things. Just as an example, at my home institution, we right now call it academic service learning as the sort of umbrella programming, and we're moving towards calling it community engaged learning to broaden it, right? And so there is some fun discussion about that in that section about the sort of when the difference in language matters and when it doesn't, as it relates to service learning versus community engaged learning. But great question and one that is a sort of feels like a perennial question for the field, and probably not one that we can fully answer in like, in the minute left. But yeah, thanks for asking. And Arlene put a good example, community-based participatory research, can mean something different than just community engaged research, right? Because that participatory component, sets up a different level of expectation in terms of, what the research looks like, who's involved, who's contributing, and things like that. So thanks for that example, Arlene. 1 minute left. Any last questions? Any open comments? I will just say thank you again, all, for taking an hour. Arlene, were you going to say something?
Just fantastic session. Really
Oh,
thoroughly enjoyed it and so spot on. So many times I felt like I was snapping my fingers and very excited. So just the fact that we're having an open conversation like this that we can all really learn and enjoy. And my heart is so full right now. So thank you.
thank you, Arlene. Thanks for saying so. That, of course, means the world. And yeah, it's great to have everybody, and look forward to many more conversations in the future. I'm happy to stick around for a minute or two if folks want, but I know everyone has many other things to do today. So thank you again for sharing an hour with us.